Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Really been looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, man. It's so funny. I feel like I say this often in the beginning of interviews where I'm like, it's a long time coming. We've talked about it and just never happened. And that's life, right? Especially when somebody is on the road all the time, literally all the time on the road. It's tough to lock it down. But now I feel like it's the perfect timing as you just come out with your book, The Journey of My Mother's Son, which this is volume 1, and it's really a collection of your stories of life and travel and being on the road. It's super intriguing, man, because you've had such a life. But why don't we start out with who's Dan Clouser today? And then we'll break down how you got there.
All right. Well, Dan Clouser today is a guy that lives full time in an RV with his wife and his golden retriever. And we travel around the country. We stay in a lot of campgrounds. We stay in a lot of friends and family's driveways. Unfortunately, your driveway is a little too sloped for us to stay there. So
it's really sloped.
You've missed that. We'll never just pull into your driveway and say, hey, we'll be here for a week. But just, a guy who has learned, probably a recovering workaholic.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
Has learned to enjoy life and enjoy the journey. And we love every minute of what we're doing.
Yeah, man. And your roots are in baseball, and how we connected are in baseball. You were the president and CEO of a nonprofit called Big Vision Foundation. I think that was your title. And I ended up on the board through circumstance of a job that I had. And I was like, yeah, I like baseball. And I ended up on your board. And, obviously growing up and loving baseball, I think it's always there, right? Like you're always going to have a love for the game. So I want to go back in your life and talk a little bit about that journey, because you became a coach and then obviously a mentor to so many children. How did that journey begin for you, and where did you find that love? Like this is what I want my life to be.
So, I mean, again, I think like 90% of American, boys and a lot of American girls as well, you grow up and you start playing the game as a young child. And I just fell in love with it. I played a lot of other sports. I played basketball, football, played some soccer, but baseball was just that one thing that I was always playing. And, I just loved the game. I loved everything about the game. I wasn't, a superstar player. I had to work hard all the time. So I was always hustling. I was always working hard in practice. And then as I got older, as my high school career was ending, I'd made the decision not to go to college. I ended up going to a trade school. Initially I thought I was going to go on to be a big recording engineer or record producer. So I went to a recording school out in Ohio, which obviously didn't offer any type of sports. And I wanted to keep playing. And the way to keep playing was to start an organization. So when I first started coaching, I didn't necessarily want to start coaching. That wasn't the goal. Yeah. I wanted to play some more. And I was, we started an adult baseball league, and a bunch of my buddies I'd graduated high school with, or, played against, graduated, a year or two before me. We put this team together and, kind of didn't really have a coach. So I was the guy who fell into it as being the guy who, started it.
Yeah.
And, so my first year of coaching was really kind of odd, because I'm coaching guys that I, played with, played against, or the same age as me, guys that were older than me. It was just kind of a strange situation how my coaching career started. But I did take it seriously from day one. And then, as we continued on and got older, started coaching kids, And that was really where the flame got brighter at that point, when you were realizing the impact you're making on these kids' lives. And something that through this journey has been you know kind of like an opportunity to see some of the blossoms of the seeds I planted in some of these, young men and women that I've coached over the years. Because, a lot of times being a coach can be a little bit of a thankless job. Everybody reminds you when you do something wrong.
Yeah. Especially this
Seldom,
day and age, man.
yeah. Seldom do they tell you when you do something right. But nevertheless, you're planting those seeds in these kids, and you're hoping that someday they bloom. And, unfortunately, a lot of times coaches don't get to see those bloom. And that's been one of the most awesome things about us traveling, is getting to connect with some of my old players in Arizona and Georgia and Florida and, Maryland and all parts in between, and, seeing what they've done with their lives, and it's so much more than the game at that point. I mean, in our organization, I always said, we were proud that we had, I think at the end, it came out to be about 54 players that went on to play professionally.
Wow.
We had one that, had a cup of coffee in the big leagues for a little bit with the Mets. But the most important were those kids who went on to be entrepreneurs and doctors and lawyers and businessmen, and, just hardworking individuals. We've got some kids who are ditch diggers, and that's 100% okay,
Yeah.
because they're making an impact. And, so that's really been probably the most rewarding thing for me. And it's interesting because I didn't set out to be a coach, but once I started coaching those kids, I realized how important of a role that was.
Yeah, and it became your life. And like you mentioned, you talk about being a workaholic and somebody who, and I saw it firsthand, somebody who pours their heart and soul into what they really believe in. And then to create an impact, right? And to partner with Olympians and all these other people to make that reach even bigger. So there's more children that could learn the life lessons that we learn in baseball, right? Like, we're not just talking about baseball, and we're going to get to the life journey part of it. But like, when we talk about baseball, I think when you play and you love the game and you learn to respect the game, you learn so much more about life, right? And what have you seen in these kids, and even in yourself, that you've learned from baseball that you've really kind of brought into your own life or their own lives?
The biggest thing is the teamwork aspect. And so many of the kids that we've been able to get together with, they've reiterated that. Most of them, I end up doing a podcast with them, which is, again, really, really cool, to hear it in their own words. And teamwork is the thing in baseball that probably teaches you the most about life. That, there's certain things on the baseball or softball field that you can do on your own, that you have control over. But there's other things that you just have no control over. You can be a great pitcher with an incredible curveball, but if you don't have the confidence that your catcher can handle catching that curveball for strike three, the curveball in the dirt, to make a really good batter look silly, and it gets past him, well, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
So you're, regardless how good you are, you're depending on that other guy that you're, throwing the ball to do their job as well.
Yeah. And I think, real quick, that's such a great life lesson, right? Like, everybody talks about the self-made millionaire and the self-made this or whatever. There's really no self-made anything. I think that there's actually self-made losers, like people who try and do it on their own and then they fail, and okay, cool, let's learn the lesson and realize that everything we do is teamwork, right? Like, I look at everything I've built and everything that I've been able to do, and even with your organization that you ran, it's a teamwork effort, right? Yeah, there might be one person that seems to take the reins, but you can't do certain things without the other people. And I think that's a great life lesson to learn into life and business and relationships and all the other things in between.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And I agree with you 100%. There is no such thing as a self-made millionaire or self-made anything, because all of us have had to get that break from somebody. All of us had to have someone who believed in us, someone who had some, who we present this crazy harebrained idea to, who doesn't look at you and say, dude, you've lost your mind. We need that person to look at you and say, wow, man, that's a stretch, but you can do it,
Yeah.
and if you need my help, I'll help you. Again, I mean, I refer to it a lot. You're the first event that you did here in Terry Weaver speak, and talking about, instead of surrounding yourself with people who say why, surround yourself with people who say why not. And that's something that stuck with me for years, and you've got to surround yourself with those people who, when you come up with that crazy idea, are like, yeah, man, let's do it. Why not? Somebody else did it.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Yeah. And I think that's a great segue into what you're doing with your life now, right? Because you literally left it all behind. Like, you went from being a workaholic to dropping it all, selling your house, and moving into an RV, where most people were like, I could never even imagine doing it. And now you're on the road 24/7, right? You're actually at home right now. It's funny that we're talking on Zoom when you're actually 15 minutes from me, when you're normally 7 hours from me. But with that being said, like, what was it about you finally going, I want to make a commitment to doing this? Tell me the backstory a little bit about, because I know your mom did some of this when she was still with us and all the things. So tell us a little bit about how you decided this is what I want to do.
Yeah. So, if you would have talked to me in 2018, there's no chance I would have said, yeah, you know what, I'm probably going to sell everything in another year and go out and do this. And then in 2019, in the beginning of 2019, I took a trip to Dallas, Texas. And I drove there, and I was going down to the ABCA convention, the American Baseball Coaches Alliance convention. And it just so happened that Leo Miko was going to be in Dallas at the same time to help Crystal Bustos do a softball camp down there. So I found out that, our paths were going to cross. I reached out to Leah and I'm like, hey, let's get together, when you get in town. And so got together with, her and Crystal, and was introduced to a new friend at the time, Melanie Torres, and just had a great time hanging out with them. And after Dallas, I took an odd detour back to Pennsylvania down through Louisiana, and spent some time with Jenny Finch, who's, also who we did softball camps with Lee and Crystal with up in Pennsylvania. And, another friend of ours that we did the camps with, Lori Pritchard, and, hung out with them for a couple of days, went to church with them, and, took my time driving back. And it was really one of the first times in my life where I really kind of took my time on a journey. We traveled a lot with the organization, but there was always a very regimented schedule. It was like, okay, bus leaves at 6 a.m. We've got to be at the Old Country Buffet by 8:30, get the kids fed and get them out and back on the bus by 9:30. So we're at the complex by noon, or whatever the case was.
Yeah.
So as much as I enjoyed that traveling, there wasn't a lot of flexibility, so on this trip, I stopped in Memphis for a day on the way down. I took my time going back. And there's like something that clicked as I was on that, on the road by myself at that point, where it was like, man, I think I finally understand why Mom did what she did, and then when I got back, I was in the process of adding some chapters to my first book, The Beauty of a Diamond Through the Eyes of a Coach. And it was a long road, because when you're working 80 to 100 hours a week over the summer in the, at the complex, it's tough to sit down and write. And then even in the winter, you're just kind of, comatose.
You're like, this is my time I can finally relax.
Yeah. But, I got back and I knocked out like 3 or 4 chapters in no time. So there's just like newfound inspiration in me to write again. And later on that year in February, I ended up doing the same thing. I drove by myself down to Orlando to do a soccer camp with Allie Krieger, who we were going to have up at our complex later on that year to do a camp. And again, on the way down, I stopped and saw one of my old players in Atlanta. I then drove down to Orlando, stayed with one of my cousins at her house in Orlando. And, the way back, again, took my time. I didn't just shoot straight up 95. I got off in 95 and, drove some secondary roads through South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia. And same thing, man. I got back and just wrote like I hadn't written for a while. And that's when I really kind of started, thinking about it. Like, you know what, maybe it's time for a change, which was very, again, very odd because, as much as I say I was a workaholic, I mean, the work I was doing was meaningful, again, changing kids' lives, impacting these kids, so it wasn't like I was in a dead end 9 to 5, hate your job situation. Like I loved what I was doing. So this was kind of going back and forth in my head, for a while. And then I finally sprung it on Sandy. And she thought I'd lost my mind. So we continued to have conversations about it over the course of a couple months till finally she was like, all right, let's do this and see how it turns out. So yeah, it was an interesting thing. I mean, because I loved telling people about my mom and her journey of taking an old 1967 Plymouth Valiant and yanking the back seat out of it and sticking a sheet of plywood and a mattress in there and just cruising around. But that, again, it was always her story. It wasn't, I never thought it was supposed to be my story. And those 2 trips and understanding some of the peace that she probably had on the road was pretty incredible. And I tell people all the time, I love going to the different places that we've done and the different volunteer projects that we've done, but still one of my favorite parts of this journey is the actual drive. And I jokingly bust my wife's chops about the fact that we've done, I think, 38,000 miles on this journey so far, and
Unreal.
she's driven about 70. So I bust her chops about that, but honestly, it really doesn't bother me because I absolutely love being behind that wheel and just driving. And again, the best ones are when we're on the secondary roads. I mean, we try to avoid interstates if at all possible. Sometimes you can't. But when we're on secondary roads, it's pretty pretty incredible. And those are the times where we just kind of happen to find a spot that we weren't even expecting to stop at. I mean, we're on the way up here. That happened in West Virginia. We're just cruising over US 60, which is going through the mountains and all kinds of switchbacks and some white knuckle driving as you're going up and down.
I can't even imagine that in an RV.
And all of a sudden we come up upon this state park in West Virginia, and we're like, hey, it's lunchtime. Yuke's got to go potty. Here's a big parking lot. Let's pull in here and see what it's like. And we go in there, and they just had some of the most incredible lookouts and overlooks that you'd ever imagine. And we hung out there for probably about an hour or so, and again, completely unplanned, but incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, no, and I love that, man. And it's so funny. I often talk with, and I've said this to you before, I often talk with Lauren about like, how cool would it be to just leave it all behind, all the stresses of the world that can be created, and just go RVing and drive around. And then I realized, like, I myself personally by myself drove from Pennsylvania down to New Orleans. I went one way down and I went one way back. And so it was a 19-hour round trip, something along those lines. And No, that's a lie. That's a 19-hour each way trip. And I did it in 4 days, which was exhausting. But I was like, I hate driving. So my goal now is, if I want to live that RV life, is to make enough money during my time of being an entrepreneur so I can hire a driver for the remainder of my life. That way I can travel like that, but then I don't have to actually do the driving. So kudos to you, for being able to do that. And so what's been the hardest part about making such a drastic shift in your life, from the standpoint of like working 80 to 100 hours in this passion of baseball to being able to go, hey, let's take a road off here and take an hour and just relax, and it wasn't in the plan?
I think the hardest part, has definitely been leaving our family, here in Pennsylvania. All of our kids are here. My dad's still here. My mother-in-law is still here. My brother, sister-in-law are still here. We're at my sister-in-law's house right now. So that's probably been the toughest part, but it's funny because it's almost made us stronger as a family as well. I think we value the time together more now than what we did, because again, what it's like. I mean, life gets in the way. So even though, 3 of our 4 kids we lived within, 15, 20 minutes of, but there are still times you would go, 2-3 weeks without seeing each other,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
and it's just like, oh, well, we'll see him next week. Well, next week, we'll see him next week. Where now I think we enjoy our time together a lot more. And I think we value and cherish it a lot more than what we did then. So even though it's difficult, I think there's been a blessing in disguise through that as well. And that, like I said, that's probably been the toughest thing, but has also been rewarding in a way as well, to, again, just make us understand, to live in the moment a lot more than what we ever did.
Sure. No, no. And I love that, man. And like you said, like, being so close to your family, sometimes you push off that time, but now you realize when you are seeing them, I'm sure it's so much more intentional, right? Like there's so much more being present and being there with them versus like, yeah, we can see them again in 3 days if we really wanted to. But, and the reality is we don't see people that often, as much as we say we want to, et cetera. But that's so true. But I wanted to dive into your book. And like I said, it's The Journey of My Mother's Son, Many Random Thoughts from the Road. If anybody watching on YouTube, that is the book right there. And it is available now, which is cool. But let's talk a little bit about what made you decide to start keeping this journal. I mean, it really is kind of a journal of you telling these amazing life stories.
Yeah. Again, I mean, writing's been something that's been part of my life since I was, a young child. I just enjoyed writing. When I was probably 10, 11 years old, I wrote a little newsletter for my brother's adult soccer team, which is probably my first dip of writing. And, it was cool to, again, this little kid, to bring this handwritten on notebook paper, Melbourne United Post is what I called it. And, seeing these guys who are in their 20s and 30s and their wives and girlfriends, like pass this around and read it. And, it was cool. And so I always enjoyed writing. So when I published the first book in 2012 and then republished it last year, I knew I wanted to just continue to write. So, a big part of this journey is blogging. And this first version of the book, the Many Random Thoughts from the Road, is a lot of my blogs, just repolished and, edited and, better than when they were first written, sort of thing. Not everything in there is a former blog, but a lot of them are. And, really for me, writing is one of those things that is almost therapeutic,
Sure.
So when I talk about random thoughts from the road. That is literally what that book is made up of. And, the inspiration for those, could be seeing a sunset or a sunrise, or losing a dear friend, or losing my sister to, opioid abuse. It's just what hit me at that time and how I could, therapeutically work through that. And that's really what writing is for me. It's very therapeutic. It's, going through that and just, punching it in on the keyboard and reading over it again and then throwing it out there and sharing it, which a lot of times exposes a lot of vulnerability as well. So that's really why I wanted to, kind of get that out in a book form as well. And it is the beginning of a series. As the subtitle of my podcast, which is also The Journey of My Mother's Son, but the subtitle is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which, comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song. And so, the first one being Many Random Thoughts from the Road, and then volume 2 will be, Many Little People, and volume 3 will be Many Little Places, which, will, again, volume 2 will talk about the many little people that we've met, both on this journey and some that we met before the journey, some who I don't even know their names, but yet a 5 or 10 or 15-minute conversation made a huge impact on my life. And those are really the ones that I probably cherish even more so than the people who I can reach out to via text or pick up the phone and have a conversation with, is those people who is, again, you sometimes think it's a chance meeting, but I'm a firm believer that nothing really ever happens by chance. Like I distinctly remember when we were in Selma, Alabama, we'd gotten there and we were going to, we wanted to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge and then drive the route that they marched from Selma to Montgomery. And, we're there, we went into the national park in Selma, in the museum. And then we're just kind of walking around and there's, a guy sitting there in a Yankees hat who is a school teacher, and it's summertime. And he's like, hey, you want to learn more about the march? Both my uncles, were in the march. And,
wow.
So he was, again, a school teacher, and he was like, for $20, I'll give you a story. And what I use that $20 for is I, put a fund together for kids in the school. And I'm like, that's right up my alley. And I would love to hear a different perspective of the march, and it was very impactful, and it was, it made an impact. And again, that's just one of so many other chance meetings that we've had of, people in campgrounds. And, there's an old couple we met in a campground, Carol and Jack, they were named. I don't, know their last names, but she was a retired ballet teacher, and she's 80 years old and she's driving this Class A RV, towing a truck, and she wasn't more than 5'3", and it was just super cool. Before we left the campground, she invited us into their rig and gave us some fruit and gave us some tortilla soup that she had made. Nice. Just a cool little interaction, and we'll probably never see them again, but we'll never forget them either. So looking forward to that one. I'm in the process of writing it now. My goal is to have it written before we leave Pennsylvania. Seems I have some time where I'm not driving right now. And then volume 3 being Many Little Places, again, just talks about, so many of the cool things that we've seen. This country is so massive and so incredibly awesome.
Yeah. It's like being transported to different worlds sometimes when you get to certain places.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. In southern Utah, we were at Snow Canyon State Park, and you would think you're on Mars because there's all these red petrified dunes, they're called. And it's, again, a landscape like I'd never seen in, in the Northeast Mid-Atlantic region here that we're in. And it's just incredibly awe-inspiring. And you're like, man, like we're not that far apart, a couple thousand
Yeah.
miles, and it changes this much.
Yeah, it's absolutely
bizarre.
crazy. Yeah, and I mean, I've been to so many different places now, big and small, and I love the fact that it can feel like you're in a completely different world right within our state, even within Pennsylvania. You're like, oh my gosh, like we're in a completely, we're not in Kansas anymore, right? Like it's like absolutely crazy. And I love that how you tell your stories and how there's a life lesson and everything, right? And I think it speaks a lot to, number one, your vulnerability and being able to open up and truly share your own personal journey and the sacrifices that you've made in your life for others. And then beyond that, the understanding and perspective of being super present. You're somebody who I've always had conversations with, and I realize how present you are in that moment. There's no distractions. There's no anything else. I'm here, and I'm here now for a reason. And your book reflects that, right? Like the fact that you can talk about these dunes in southern Utah, like they're this whole thing. Most people are like, oh, that's cool, moving on. Right. And for you, it means so much more. And I think that's really cool for people to really start to read these stories. And like I said, I just got in the book, so I just started diving in. But love the life lessons that are within them. And I think people will really enjoy it. So before we get to how people get all that stuff, I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody on the show. It's a two-part question. The first part is, what is your definition of success? And the second part is, what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
So for me, I probably define success a little differently than a lot of people. Because for me, it's not about, money or fame or fortune. It's really about freedom, and if you can wake up and make your own decisions and, do what you want to do on your terms, I think you've had a pretty successful life. And, for the second part of, how do I make sure, the 3 things I'm making sure of there, is number one, I think I wake up every morning and just thank God that I have another day, and I think if you wake up with an attitude of gratitude, it changes your perspective for the entire day at that point. The second thing that I think I do on a daily basis is I always, am empathetic of other people and, try to see things through their perspective as well. Because there's way too many people in the world who it's just, this is the way I see things. That's the only way that's right. And I just don't believe that that's the case. And I think we should have more conversations with people that don't necessarily look like us, think like us, or, believe in the same things that we do.
Yeah.
And, the third thing is just, I try to walk my dog every day as long as the weather is right. And, some people may say, well, how does that ensure your success? And again, it's just being in that moment, and understanding, how precious and freeing, that walk is. And it can be whether it's a hike through nature or a walk through the neighborhood. It just gets me in the right mindset to approach the day. Like when you texted me this morning to confirm that we were still good, for the call today, I was walking him, and again, it just puts you in that mindset to, it goes back to the gratitude component of, what, this is something we can do today to get your mind clear and approach anything else that we got to approach today.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love it. So like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question, but before we get there, let's get to the important part. How do people get a hold of you? How do they get this book? How can they go along on this journey with you? Essentially, like, I feel like that's what this book is. Like, I feel like you take people on this journey with you. So how do people get a hold of it?
So it's available on Amazon. It's also available on my website if you want a signed copy, which is journeymymotherson.com, or if that's too much of a mouthful or too much for you to type in, it's also danclouser.com. It'll get you to the same place. Yeah, I mean, on my website, all my blogs are there, stuff that's been published, stuff that hasn't been published. And of course my podcasts are there as well, which, again, is Journey My Mother's Son. That's available through all the same places your podcast is available to. And, I want to thank you for getting me in the right position when I kind of branched off on my own podcast journey as well. Once I, left having a producer for me and, having Tony Reese do all that stuff for me, you got me pointed in the right direction on how I could do it on my own as well. So I always appreciate that for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, guys, definitely check out the podcast. So wherever you're listening to this right now, hit pause, make sure you come back, but hit pause for a second, go find his podcast, go hit subscribe and give it a listen. I've been on there. Have I been on there twice? Just once. I think I've been on there once.
Because the first time we had a technical difficulty. So we did 2 podcasts. Only one of them ever got to the air.
Right. That is right. So. I love it, man. I love it. And like I said, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. And that is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Biggest moment of growth. Man, I think it's to pinpoint to one moment is tough, but I think the realization that I'm never done growing, whenever that might have been, it was probably sometime after my mom passed away. I think just the understanding of there is something to learn every single day, something to continue to grow. At no point are we ever done growing. And that's one of the things I've always approached, whether back when I was selling building materials or when I was coaching. I was always willing to listen to someone else, to learn. You may not take something, what someone else, the advice someone gives you, you may not take 100% from start to finish, but there's always some kernel in there that you're able to pick and use for yourself. And that was one of the things I always, anytime I went into a sales seminar, anytime I went into a coach's clinic, it was like, all right, I know I'm going to learn one thing. I mean, even going to your event, it's like you go to those things and it really turns into a system overload.
Yeah.
But you're going to walk out of there with one thing that you're going to be able to use and apply to your life. So, it's really the understanding of knowing that you're never done growing. So
I love it. Dan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your journey with my audience. And more importantly, thank you so much for your friendship and your support through the years, man. I really, really appreciate you. And I'm excited to dive more into your book, man. And I hope everybody listening right now also grabs the book, because I've already been impressed and I just started. So really looking forward to getting more. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Justin.